In the first instance, delivery means more effective government. And more effective government in a context where you're building state capacity. Remember, the old South African state, pre-1994, was a state that represented a minority and which repressed the majority. Overnight, virtually, we had to transform that state and begin to service all of South Africa. So building institutions, critical ones, hospitals, educational institutions, tax administration, also institutions that can support business, that would support small businesses in what they need to do, provide infrastructure at a community level which would make a difference to entrepreneurs accessing markets, for example, all of which are serious issues in the South African context, is a very important role that government can and should play, and one that we've tried in various ways. Within my experience, we've done a formidable job, probably in about a 10-year period, of providing a new policy framework on the tax side and an effective tax administration. We have a national treasury, which also had to be built from a very old bureaucracy into a very modern treasury, and have done absolutely successfully at that. Over the last 6 years or so, the South African treasury has either been first or second in a global survey of budget transparency. Out of 98 or 90 odd countries, for example, in 2012, New Zealand is the only country that beat us. So we're second. Last year, 2 years ago, we were first. So coming from where we come from, that's a formidable achievement on our side. Where we have had challenges is in our schooling system. And whilst there have been some improvements in the last 10 years, that's a key challenge that we need to address, particularly upgrading teachers, bringing in ICT to more effectively train our young people and capacitate them, and learning about how we can cut down youth unemployment, which is very similar to Spain at about 50%. How do we give young people their first opportunities at work? Amongst the structural changes we're looking at is how do we get our public works programs, which are using government or fiscal money to create jobs for people or give them job opportunities to work more effectively. But as a parallel to that, get the private sector to buy in on the job creation and job opportunity agenda, and create some incentives that will move things in the right direction. We have done reasonably well in stabilizing our health system. We now have a 14-year plan to introduce a national health insurance system and do it within a sustainable fiscal framework. In South Africa, you have a thin layer of people who have health insurance, as you might call it, and are able to access that from the private sector. But the vast majority of South Africans don't have that financial capability. And how do we balance out the access factor and the quality factor is one of our key objectives. Now, what is involved is drilling into the minds of, in my experience, there is in the tax administration, of 14,000 people, getting them to embrace a service culture, which means people come first, their concerns come first. Tax collection is about, in our context, combining three elements. Firstly, educating the public constantly. Why should you pay tax? And maybe somebody should hire us to speak to the multinational companies and explain to them why they should pay tax as well. But that's been a very important component for creating legitimacy for the tax system amongst the South African citizens. The second is constantly improving service and making it easier for people to comply. And the third is those who don't want to comply will then be acted upon in terms of whatever law they've actually transgressed. And there's been fascinating innovations in all of these areas, which would include taking 200 people and walking down the streets of a particular part of the country. We had a small business amnesty, for example, for forgiving tax not paid for a particular period a few years ago. And I would think about 10,000 of the 14,000 staff actually walk streets, door to door. visiting people, show us that you registered for tax, show us your last payment, but in a very polite and cooperative way. And that began to send a very important message about the kind of links that we want to have between ourselves and others. And perhaps finally is to get the right balance between government and the private sector, which is we'll work with you, we'll help to solve your problems, but if you transgress the law, we're willing to sit across the table and find a solution. If, however, you're not wanting to take up that particular option, then we have a very effective court system that will take care of you. And in that way, we are able to demonstrate fairness, we are able to demonstrate independence, we are able to demonstrate that we deal with everybody on an equal footing. And all of that actually helps to increase credibility of government. Many activists who were in the anti-apartheid struggle 5 years after the end of apartheid became councillors at a municipality level, became members in 1994 of provincial legislatures, which we have in South Africa, and of national parliament. So you needed to give black people opportunities that they didn't have under apartheid. Equally in parallel with that, you had to rebuild systems and sometimes invest quite heavily in information technology as well. But also find people with the right expertise from communities that weren't represented in government adequately. So on the one hand, you expected to adapt to a whole new system of governing and governance, on the one hand, and on the other hand, use the expertise that was there in the state in a wise way, and at the same time, ensure that you create a more representative bureaucracy and governmental system as well. Some of that has worked, some of that remains a challenge, and so probably for the next 20 years, we will constantly have to train accountants and train scientists and train experts in fields such as energy or water or whatever the case might be. We've reached, I think, an interesting level of competence within the state, but there are still areas where we have significant weaknesses that we need to continue to remedy.